Hello lovely readers! Today I'm going to be talking about reading classics and how to read them, because I know that it can be really intimidating when you've got a big classic or just a classic that you're not sure of and loads of people have loved it and loads of people have read it and you are just so intimidated by it. So I thought I would share some tips and tricks on how to read classics. This is going to be part of my new classic series where I talk about classical literature. So if there are any videos that you'd like to see in that series, please let me know in the comments below and I will make sure to get to them because I'm really excited about it. I'm reading a lot more classics lately and I love talking about them, so I'd love to share that passion with you. So one of the current classics I'm reading is Middlemarch by George Eliot, and I've never read any George Eliot before, and this is 900 pages, or just over 900 pages long, and that is really intimidating. This will be the longest classic I've ever read. So I was thinking, how can I make this easier for myself? How can I make sure that I read this? So I set out, I calculated it all, and I figured out that if I read a minimum of 3 chapters every day, then I'll finish it in a month. I think that is very realistic, and so far today I've read 1 chapter, so I'll read a few more later, and then I can also read something else at the same time. So I think that is a very realistic goal for me, but you can adjust it to you. If you say, well, there are X number of chapters in here, if I read 1 a day then I'll finish it by this point. I think there are something like 81 chapters in here, so you can read it in 2 months, and I think actually it doesn't matter. So far I've read 1 chapter and I think it would be quite easy to pick it up and put it down. So that is another one of my tips. Number 2 is find a reading pace that works for you. A lot of the time I find that I cannot read a classic in one go. I couldn't just sit down and read a book in a day like I could with any other book, because I find that they're often very different to what I'm used to. So I will set out and I'll say, well, if I don't finish this by the end of the year, that's okay, as long as I keep reading it and I finish it eventually. So I think, you know, these books have been around for hundreds of years, most of them. They are going to last, so there's no rush because the authors aren't releasing new things, so there is no rush. So find a reading pace that works for you. For example, I read Jane Eyre last year. I read it I think in December and then I finished it in about March this year, and I put it down in between. As long as you can remember what goes on, then that's fine. But I also understand that some people like to read them in one go, and there are particular books that I like to do that for. For example, Virginia Woolf, I have to read her books in one sitting because I cannot remember what goes on in them. They are so lyrical and fluid that you cannot read them and put them down and pick them back up again a week later. It does not work for me, but for some people they might find that quite weighty and think, I cannot take this all in. For me, I just prefer to read them in one sitting, whereas other books like Jane Austen I take a lot longer to read. My third tip is to do your research afterwards, because I find this really enjoyable. To after I finished a book, or when I'm reading it even, to look on the sites and read critical essays on them. They don't even have to be particular critical essays, but you can get kind of study guides for them that you can find online, and I find those really interesting to read. I don't think there's any shame in doing that, and I find it really interesting to hear what other people have thought and other takes on maybe the characters or the plot or themes in there. So I think it's really interesting to sit down and break the book down. That really works for me, but again, it doesn't work for everyone. I think reading classics is a completely different experience to, say, reading YA. I can read YA books in 2 or 3 hours sometimes, but it takes me a lot longer to read a classic, and I think that is perfectly acceptable, and I think you have to go in there with that mindset. So my 4th tip is to prepare yourself for reading a classic. Now this could just be telling yourself, this is going to take a bit longer, but that is fine. I have to get into that mindset of wanting to read it, feeling enthusiastic about reading it. So actually even just talking to other people can help as well. So I think talking to other people, getting in the mindset, preparing yourself is always essential. But kind of contradictory is my next point, which is to ignore everybody else. Ignore how much they loved this book, ignore how much they hated that book, because you are the only one that will be able to tell if you like it. It's your brain, you're processing it, and everyone will process it differently. Try and ignore the pressure as much as you can, because otherwise it's going to completely ruin your reading experience. I've read some books that I really didn't like, but it's other people's favourite books, and I think this can be particularly strong when it comes to classics. So try to ignore the literary snobs who say, well, why are you reading that now? Why haven't you read it already? Try to ignore the people who are loving it and hating it, but also don't be afraid to have conversation at the same time. So it can be kind of contradictory, but try to just enjoy the experience and go with the flow. And I think a final add-on point should be enjoy yourself, enjoy the reading experience. Don't fret about it if you don't enjoy it. Just enjoy yourself. That's what reading is about, and don't be afraid to, you know, put the book down and say, I'm not going to finish this, but maybe in a few years. They aren't going anywhere. They have been in print a long time, so honestly, just go with it. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!